The World Builder's Anvil, episode 21. Don't know where to start building your fantasy world? Do you need more? Does it make sense? Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination. This is the place that will help prime your mind. Now, it's time to heat up the forge, break out the mithril ingots and hammer. Welcome to the World Builder's Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram. Let's sup from the mug of Java and build. Today's topic, world building trap. Consistency equals fake. Welcome back. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram, and I will be your guide today as I look at my first world building trap. And this one is consistent equals fake. And at this point, if you've actually been listening to all of the episodes for the show, you're going, wait, you're like, you have to be consistent. And now you're telling me it's fake. And it is if you take it the wrong way. When I say be consistent, I mean once you make a decision, whether it's a naturalistic decision or it's something you want to do so you force it that way, however you arrive to the decision and the rule, once you start using it, you have to keep using it. Unless you can find a reason in your world to explain it away, it will confuse the actual reader or player. Whatever the person is who's interacting with your world will be confused if it's not consistent. However, the world building trap is not that. There's a tendency as you're building cultures to try and make the culture exactly what you want. And the reason I call that a trap is what will happen is there's never a deviation. There's no messiness in it. And life is full of messiness. And you just can't escape it. So the problem is if you make a culture that there's never a hypocrisy in, there's never something counterintuitive. They don't act the wrong way sometimes. They don't act the right way sometimes. It becomes predictable. And that's the trap. So if you make your worlds or your cultures or your characters or anything in there always act the same, like a simple computer program, a conditional statement, if culture A sees this, they do that, or else they do this. If that is your process for developing or having your culture or races interact in the world, it's going to be fake. And that's where it's being fake. So here's a few areas to really keep in mind for this. Languages are always messy. Some languages like English are very, very messy. We have a lot of irregular verbs. We have a lot of exceptions to rules. And a lot of it is all of the different languages that have helped influence it early on. And maybe part of it are the cultures that use it like exceptions. I'm not exactly sure on that. But you'll have languages like Japanese, which only has 3 irregular verbs. At least that's what I was told from a linguist I know, Dean Frost. I'll put a link to her in this episode. She says they have 3 irregular verbs, which means they still do. There are still exceptions. If you have a very orderly race, there are going to be exceptions and things that happen over time that make the language a little clouded in areas, that make it a little difficult to learn for people who aren't used to the language. Another thing, individuals will never be a cultural ideal exactly. They'll never be actually what the culture is exactly. In that last episode where we talked about cultural norms, if you want to have Mr. America and you have your cultural actuals filled out or your cultural ideas and his match those exactly, it's not going to seem very real. And that might be okay, depends on the kind of story you're trying to deliver. But it will seem fake. And unless you're playing on stereotypes or you're trying to do something along that way, the more characters that you have that are just a carbon copy of a culture's behaviors with a new name, it's going to seem fake. And it's going to actually be a little boring too, because think about this. If you were to walk into a bar with the Borg, and the Borg doesn't try and kill you, which would be nice, but they all interact with you the same way. How boring is that bar? there's no surprise. And surprise is the thing that keeps people itching for that next thing because they don't know where the next surprise is going to be. So when the surprise is through deviation, it's good. When it's breaking your rules, it's bad. And in the same way with individuals, cultures that don't change based off of their people interacting with the world are also bogus. It's another part of the trap. It's almost the same trap in reverse. The idea where you have a bunch of individuals who go out and they discover the world is not flat. And they go back and convince the whole culture the world's not flat. If that culture does not change with that new major information that they can now sail around the world, that the world is this finite place, it's going to be fake. So if you have those kind of situations, which are maybe less common in a story, you're going to get hurt. You're going to look bad. And your people are going to be confused. Wait, Spain just figured out the world isn't flat, but that hasn't changed them? In my world, I have a race of dwarves. And dwarves believe that heaven is another cave. And all the stars in the skies are cave openings. And the planet that is above them is actually just a really big cave. That's why the word Gardul means big cave, because it's what the dwarfs called it, and it sort of caught for my whole world. And yes, I did make that up after I called it Gardul, but hey, that's how it got there. That's what it means now. So during a period of time, as technology and magic grows, the dwarfs start to figure out that, wait, this planet's round. We can dig all we want. If we dig the wrong way, it opens up a bad spot, which we just assumed was the underworld, but it's not the underworld. It's the inner part of the planet. There's no way to get out of here by digging. That causes a massive cultural upheaval because the race is not fanatically religious, but very, very religious. And when the whole purpose of the race and the countries that they create are to find heaven by digging, and you can't get there from here, as they would say in me, you can't get there from here. Once they figure that out, massive cultural upheaval. Now, there are some workarounds. So the point I'm trying to make is being consistent means that once you make a choice, you have to respect it. And whenever you revisit that choice, it should look the same. So if magic is created by me praying to a god, and that's the only way magic can be created in my world, whenever someone's using magic, they have to be going through a god in your world. Or the one I have written down here is, if people have to bow whenever they enter a room and they don't do it, that should be significant in your culture. That would be something that would be listed on that cultural norms graph that I sent out in the newsletter. You would have that on there, and the consequence would be a way the culture would react to it. Now, there are workarounds for when rules are broken. One, create an exception to the rule. So if we go back to the bowing ceremony, maybe we let the reader discover that at that point, Mary did not bow when she entered the room because the owner failed to greet her properly. So there was actually a cultural exception to the bowing. The owner, Billy, has to greet Mary in a certain way. If he does, she is required to bow to him. That is one way to get around that mistake of consistency. Now, another workaround is punishing the character that breaks the rule. And it doesn't matter necessarily if they're in or outside the culture. The culture will determine whether or not they will punish people who are foreigners who don't understand their culture about breaking the rules of their culture. But one of the things that could happen is Mary might become known as Mary the Rude. Because she's rude because she does not take the time to bow the way you're supposed to whenever you enter a room. And you got to bow like that. So you know what? Mary doesn't get invited to any of the big parties anymore. It's a bad day for Mary. She's probably crying a lot. Not because she's a woman, but because she's rude. And it's also considered rude in the same culture that you have to bow in. Now, the rating for this episode, basic. And this isn't something you're so much tracking. It's something to keep in mind. Being consistent does not mean a culture has to react the same way to the same kinds of stimulus every time. There are going to be hypocrisies. That is a trap. Don't fall into it. It will make it predictable and boring. But It is something basic that you have to keep in mind as you go throughout. And once you have your cultural norms, to be consistent in the correct way, make sure you follow them in the book. If it's a big deal to bow, make sure that you have that exchange happen whenever people greet in a situation they have to bow. Make sure it's there every time. If not, people are going to wonder where it went to. Wonder if something's changed. And that might not be so bad right away, but after a while, it might start seeming fake to them. The world building task for the day. Take your culture and create a value graph once again. Then take the common behaviors that you had written out from before and start expressing consequences. How much deviation is allowed? And what are the consequences for breaking certain rules? The big ones are murder. Is there jurisprudence of the area? How is it done by the lords? Is it done by the people? If you commit murder, what is the punishment for murder? Is it killing you? Is it making you leave? What is the punishment? And once again, on that cultural graph that you have, and if you listen to the last episode, you already have that part. So you're really just doing the second part of expressing the consequences of breaking the rules. The real world task for the day, when your loved one is feeling overwhelmed with something at work or at home, do something extra to support them, something out of the ordinary. So for me, an example is when my wife is really tired, she actually, at this point, keeps them stored in the refrigerator, some frozen pizzas. I say, hey, you want me to make dinner tonight? And I make her frozen pizzas or spaghetti or something simple. She likes to cook. She does most of it. I usually help her when she cooks, but she usually likes to do that. But sometimes if she's feeling overwhelmed, she's just not in the mood. And it could be something else, something that they're not expecting. It's just a way to help support them whenever they're feeling overwhelmed. And if you don't know what to do, just ask them. They'll come up with something probably. Or they might say, thank you, there's nothing you can do to help me here. In which case, just tell them you love them. And that's just another way to support them. The T's. The T's for this episode. Cultural relations and fantasy worlds. And as always, make sure to go to gardul.com. That's GARDUL.com for the show notes. It'll be under podcasting, World Builders Anvil. That's a great place to get all of the information from the episode that you've just listened to and to see all the resources that we've talked about in this episode. Thanks for joining us this episode of the World Builders Anvil. Please be sure to rate and review us in iTunes, and please help get the word out to your friends about our show. And join me, Jeffrey W. Ingram at gardul.com, to see the progress of my world and learn why I made the choices I did. And please contact me and let me know the topics you would love to hear in the future. Now strike, while the myth rolls high.